Good morning. My name is Jeff. I'm one of the elders here at First Church of Christ. I want to welcome you, and especially welcome if you're watching online or if you watch this later. This is the last sermon in our sermon series on discipleship, Follow My Lead. And the theme that we have for this, the theme verse that we had for this comes from the Apostle Paul. And he's writing to the people in Corinth. And so in 1 Corinthians 11:1, he says this: "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." And so last week, Mike focused on the second half of that verse, following the example of Christ. And he talked about reading the Bible and understanding Christ and what his example was. And so this week, they gave me the follow my example portion of this, and to talk about discipleship. But before I do that, the first song we sang was about welcoming the Spirit in here, into this room, and in our presence. And I would like to pray and do that right now, if you'd pray with me. Our Father in heaven, we come before you and just pray for your Spirit's presence, not just in this room, but in the hearts of every person who is in this room, who's watching online, and who will watch, that the message that they hear is your message, the message of your Spirit, more than the message of mine, that this message can point to you and your love and the price you paid for us and how we can follow you. We love you, Jesus, and pray in your name. Amen. So it was a couple months ago that we were in community group, and we were having this discussion, and the discussion turned to discipleship. And we didn't use the word discipleship, or at least I don't remember us using the word discipleship, but that's basically what we were talking about. And I know community group sort of has the Vegas rule that what's said in community group stays in community group, but I feel like I can share this because I'm the one who said it. So as this discussion was going on, I said this: I cannot think of or come up with any person who intentionally discipled me, who came into my life and intentionally said, here, let me come alongside you and let me walk with you and teach you. I can't come up with that person in my life, in all the time I've been a Christian. And I've been thinking about that comment since then in the couple months. One, because I knew that I had this sermon coming up and it was about discipleship. But two, it just kind of bothered me. And so I've been thinking about that. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about just this word discipling and discipleship. And I feel like that we've made this word too narrow, that it's this very restrictive thing that we think of when we think about discipling, that it's something Jesus did, or it's something that only really advanced spiritual Christians do. And so to start out with, I would really just kind of like to maybe try to reshape how we think about the word discipling, and maybe even redefine it for us. And I'm not talking about a dictionary definition, although I find this fascinating. You may not, I don't know, but I'm going to share it anyway. If you go to Google and you look up a word definition, like I did, and I typed into Google, define disciple, the first thing it'll do is it'll give you a definition. But if you scroll down a little bit farther in Google, they'll actually give you a chart. And I have a copy of it, but it's not on the slides. But I'll kind of try to graph it out, at least air graph it for you. But what the chart is the usage of the word over time. So how frequently this word is used in print over time. And this chart for the word disciple goes back to the early 1800s. And in the 1800s, the word disciple was actually used quite a bit in print. And up through about the 1850s, the usage actually kind of climbs until we hit about the 1850s. And then the usage starts to fall. And it continues to fall and really falls pretty steeply until we hit about 1900. And then about 1900, it kind of levels out at this pretty low level and continues all the way through the 1900s. The 1960s, there's a little increase in the usage of the word, and it kind of falls back down again. until really about the early 1980s, and then the usage starts to pick up again. And I think part of that is because we've replaced this word. Disciple used to basically just mean teaching somebody or getting somebody to follow you. And so it happened in a lot of ways in life, but we've replaced the word. So now if you go to, say you take a new job or you start in a business and you want to learn the business, they may assign you a mentor. And so basically you are being mentored into how the business world works. And that's how you're learning how the business world works. Or maybe you want to learn to play a sport, so you go hire a coach. And that coach teaches you how to play tennis or basketball or whatever it is, teaches you how to do that thing. Well, we've taken even the word coach now, we've extended it into a wider realm of life, because there are people who have a job called life coach. Their job is to coach you on how to do life. And so really, in some ways, that is discipleship. And so what I want to do is redefine this, but I'm a math geek. I'm just going to admit it. I'm a math geek. And so when I thought about this, I came up with a formula. And if you're not a math person and you're kind of sitting there twitching because you're thinking about algebra class, I apologize, but I'm a math geek. And so I came up with this formula. And the formula is this. Discipling is equal to spiritual lessons multiplied by respect, multiplied by time. And so, because I think we've a lot of us, I've done this, you've done this, maybe you've done this, you've turned discipling into kind of this either-or type thing. That we have these relationships, because discipling happens in relationships. And maybe we have this discipling relationship where we're consciously doing this. Maybe somebody's discipling us or we're discipling them. And then we have all these other relationships that are just other relationships. But what I'd like us to really, instead of thinking in this either-or way, I'd like us to think about how much discipling is occurring in a relationship. Because discipling is occurring all the time. And really, that's one of the points that I would like to make out of this, is for us to realize that discipling happens. And here's what I mean by that. So the first element of this formula that I came up with, spiritual lessons. I really struggled with the wording on this. I thought about spiritual teaching or moral lessons or life lessons. But I think any of those things can work. And what happens is all of us through our life have learned life lessons. We have something that people call a worldview. And the worldview is kind of this accumulation of what do we believe about God and Jesus and how we're supposed to live our life, what's our moral foundation. And that came from somewhere. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. All of us, that came from somewhere. And it's the accumulation of the spiritual lessons that we've learned through our lives. And so that's what I mean when I say discipling happens. This happened to us. We grew up, we learned things about God and Jesus and life, and there were spiritual lessons that were taught to us. The second part of this formula is RESPECT. Now, a few of you are having musical flashbacks, and the rest of you are wondering why I just spelled that. But respect. We've probably learned most of our spiritual lessons, our life lessons, from people that we respect, people that we've looked up to. The last element of this formula is time. We spend time in relationship with people. The foundation of most of our relationships is time spent with people. And if you look at, say we take Jesus and his discipling, for example, Jesus spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 years with this group of men. That was the time element that he put into discipling. They had an enormous amount of respect for him. They saw how he lived his life. they saw what he taught, they saw his example, and he taught them a lot. He spent pretty much most of his time teaching spiritual lessons. And so what Jesus did was Jesus got a huge amount of discipling out of the relationship that he had with those disciples. But he discipled other people that were not his disciples. He may not have spent as much time around them, so they didn't get to hear as many of his lessons. But you see, that's what I'm trying to say here. There's different levels of discipling going on in all of our relationships. And so really, my goal out of this, my other goal, besides learning that discipling happens, is for us to think about and be more intentional about increasing the discipling that's happening in our lives. So before I do that, the main part of my talk or sermon, and this may seem a little backwards, but the main point of this, or the main section, is I want to go through 7 reasons why I have not discipled, which I know that really does kind of seem backwards, but 7 reasons why I have not discipled and how I either have overcome that or in some cases I'm still struggling to overcome those reasons. Because some of you in this room, you may be doing discipling, conscious discipling, you're aware of it, you've got a plan and you're doing it. But my guess is a lot of you are like me, and you've came up with some, maybe all of these same reasons. Maybe you have your different reasons. But so I'd like to share some of these reasons, my reasons that I thought of as I was preparing this, for reasons why I haven't done and how I've worked to overcome those. So the first reason, I didn't know that I was expected to disciple people. I did not know that I was expected to disciple people. Now, some of you are going to think, wait, you grew up in church. If you know me, I did. I grew up in church. I was baptized when I was 16 years old. I've been a believer for however long that makes that. And in the Christian world, we have this verse. It's not just this verse that's important to us. We labeled it. We gave it a label called the Great Commission. We said, this is a great verse. Maybe you've heard people say that Jesus' last words should be our first priority. And the Great Commission was Jesus' last words on earth to his disciples. And the Great Commission goes like this. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe everything I have commanded you. So how could I not know that I'm supposed to disciple people? Well, let me give you a couple of explanations, reasons, excuses, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but let me give you a couple of those. One, I've actually heard that, I'm not a Greek scholar, I don't know the Greek words, but I've heard that this isn't necessarily the best translation or the way of translating, particularly the word go. The way the word go, what I've been told is that it was really better translated as saying, as you are going. As you are going through life, make disciples. And I like that better because for me, as somebody who grew up in Bluffton, and I lived away for a while, but eventually came back, raised my family here. If you haven't gone anywhere, I think it's kind of easy, or at least it was easy for me to think this verse really doesn't apply to me. But if I think about this, and if we think about this as you are going, make disciples. Make disciples of the nation, teaching them to obey all the things I've commanded you. The second reason, or second part of why I may not know that this was expected of me, I'd like to take just a few moments and I'd like for us to think about how we teach in this country, how we grow and how we learn. For the most part, what we do when somebody wants to learn something new or we want to grow is we send you to school. Starts at a really young age, maybe preschool, certainly kindergarten, elementary school, middle school. And when you go to school, you show up, they put you in a classroom, there's 15, 20, 30 kids and one teacher. And one teacher teaches this large group of people. And that continues through. And that model, we've picked that up and we've brought it into the church. When you're little, your parents may bring you, they bring you here, and they take you to the door of the Sunday school room and they send you in. And there's a teacher, maybe two teachers in this room full of kids, and we teach. We teach a large group of people. That model continues into Bible school, and it continues into this room. What's happening in this room right now doesn't look that different than the lecture halls that I sat in at Purdue. There's maybe 60 of you or so in this room. There's about 300, no, not 300, there's about 800 in my chemistry lecture hall at Purdue. We have churches out there that have one person speaking to thousands of people. It's this same model of learning how that we believe that you learn to grow as a Christian. But I'd like to give you this idea, that maybe learning to become a Christian is more like becoming a plumber or becoming an airline pilot. Because more like that than it is like, say, becoming an accountant or a teacher, where it's a lot of book learning. Because I don't know about you, but when I get on a plane, I don't want the pilot in that plane to have only done book learning. I want them to have gone up in it with an instructor, one-on-one. They start in little planes. They learn how to fly a small plane. They move up to bigger planes. They do hands-on work in a simulator. It's a lot of one-on-one work. And I think that in some ways we've lost this idea that the Christian life is more of an apprenticeship than it is teaching. And it involves a lot of one-on-one or one with a couple of people, more like becoming a pilot than it is, like I say, becoming an accountant, and where you spend most of your learning in a classroom. And so that was kind of my first reason why, when I say I didn't know that I was expected to disciple. I didn't even really necessarily know what discipling was. Which leads me to my second example and my second reason. I don't know how to disciple. I didn't know how to disciple. I told you, or I said at the beginning, I can't come up with any person, any specific person who ever came into my life and did this. And this kind of goes back to, I think, that graph that I talked about. I was born in 1968, grew up in the 70s, early 80s. And that's at a time where we really didn't talk a whole lot about discipling. Truthfully, I don't think we even talked a whole lot about it in the church. I think it kind of became one of those lost things. Like I said, it became this thing that only spiritually advanced people did. And so I think it was kind of lost. And since nobody did this example in my life, I didn't necessarily know what to do. Overcoming that, one of the sad things to me, there's a lot of sad things about COVID, but one of the sad things to me, particularly in this church, is that we got interrupted in this whole core classes that we were working on and the staff was working on. Because part of that core curriculum, I believe, is really meant to be talking and explaining and giving a plan on how do we disciple. Because really most of us kind of, if we accept that this is expected of us, then it's a matter of learning how to do it. And core, hopefully, will give us some tools to actually learn how to do it. The third reason I didn't think I had anything to offer. Now, that reason may affect a lot of us. And that reason can affect us for various reasons. Maybe, especially if I believe that spiritual growth is about teaching, and learning the Bible is definitely a part of spiritual growth. But if I don't feel like I know the Bible very well, I may not be really willing to go out and disciple somebody. When in reality, what they may want, and what I think people do want in discipling, is they just want somebody to come alongside them and share their experiences, good and bad. Because we can learn from people's bad experiences when they say, hey, I did this and it wasn't really a very good idea. I'd suggest you not do it. So we may not think we have anything to offer. I also see some young people in this room. and you may not think that discipling applies to you. But I will tell you this, watching my own son come up through youth group, and especially the high school youth group in this church, I can tell you that when he was a freshman and a sophomore, he really looked up to those juniors and seniors. Even if you're an eighth grader, there's people out there who are looking up to you. And they have for you that element of respect. And so this can apply to all of us. It doesn't really matter where we're at in life. If you're sitting in this room, there are people who are coming behind you who are looking up to you, and that you have an opportunity to increase the discipling that you're doing in their life. Fourth reason, I might teach the wrong thing. There is some legitimate, this is a somewhat legitimate reason, because there is negative discipling. It happens. It happens when people become part of cults. People are taught wrong things. And I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here. Excuse me. I had said earlier that we don't use this word discipling very often. It's kind of a lost word in our culture and even in the church. But if you think about how Jesus did discipling, this is what Jesus did. He saw Matthew at his job, or he saw Peter and James and John, and he walked up to them and he said, "Follow me." And some people followed him, some didn't. Matthew got up from his job and walked away, and Peter and James got up and walked away, and they followed him. And like I say, discipling isn't really a common word we use anymore, but follow me should sound really familiar to us, because we hear this all the time. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Twitter. And whether we like to think about it or not, there are a lot of people out there in social media who want us to follow them. They want us to become their disciples. We may not think of it that way, but they do want it. And in Twitter, and Facebook, and Instagram, they may not even really care who you follow. They just want you to follow somebody. Because if you do, you'll keep coming back. You'll keep coming back to their site, and you'll view the advertisements, because that's really what they want. But they want to turn you into a disciple of somebody. And so I think in the world we live in, we need to pay careful attention to who we're following, and particularly who we're following on social media. So sorry for that detour, but just felt like I needed to say that there. Fifth reason. This is a real reason for me. It's a reason I still struggle with. I might offend someone by offering to disciple him or her. I'm going to give you a confession here. It's been within the last year in this church that I felt like the Spirit was prompting me to talk to some gentleman and basically maybe meet him for lunch, but basically start this discipling relationship. And I blew the Spirit off. I just said no. And my main reason was I was afraid that if I went to him and said this, that he might think, what does this guy see in my life that he thinks that I need discipling? That I might actually offend him by having him think that, one, I've got something to teach him, and that he has something he needs to learn. And so I did. I just blew it off. And it bothers me, but it happened, and it will happen to us. If this fear is an easy thing for our enemy, Satan and the demons, to use against us, what will somebody else think? And sometimes we just need to, and I need to, get past this. Sixth reason, I don't have time. We're all busy. Every one of us is busy. I think that's the badge of honor of the modern world, to be busy. And in some cases and in some times in our life, this is a legitimate reason. We have a lot going on. But there are times and places in our lives where we may need to sort through what we're doing and where we're spending our time so that we can more consciously give time to the relationships where we can increase our discipling. We could do a whole sermon on time, so I'll just leave that one there. The seventh one, my last reason, excuse me, I let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This one might take a little bit of explanation. This is an expression I use at work a lot, or I have used at work a lot. I let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And here's what I mean by this. There's kind of a reverse expression, and the reverse expression is this. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And here's how this can play out in discipling. Let's say somebody approaches me. Some gentleman approaches me and asks me to disciple them. And so it gets over my one fear of asking them. And this person has a plan, and they're saying, will you disciple me? And I'm kind of thinking, yeah, okay, I can do this. And they say, I've got this material. Let's read through this together, and we can both read it, and then we can meet and talk about it. And I'm thinking, oh, it sounds like a good idea. This person has a plan. And then he says, and so how about if we meet once a week for a year and go through this? And all of a sudden I think, I can't do that. I can't figure out how to fit into my life right now once a week and commit to that and really do this. And so here's what happens when I let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think I can't do once a week, so I'm just going to say no. Because I can't go all the way to the standard that you're expecting, I'm just going to say no, and I'm going to do nothing. But there are some things that if they're worth doing right. But quite frankly, there are a lot of things in life that half is better than nothing. A quarter is better than nothing. And maybe if I come back to this person and say, you know what, I just don't feel like I can commit right now to once a week. How about every other week? Maybe once a month. It's a start. It's something. It gives that person the opportunity to decide they maybe want to go forward or don't. And I think this can be a danger for us, especially there are people in this room I know who struggle with perfectionism and having to do the perfect. And there are times where the perfect becomes the enemy of the good, of just doing something is better than doing nothing. So the second goal I set out of this is really for us to view and look at this as if discipling is happening, if it's happening all around us, if it's happening in the relationships we have, how do I add more discipling to my life? And to start back with this, I'd kind of like to go back to a different definition. And this goes back to a passage that Mike used in his sermon last week. It comes from Deuteronomy, and he read the whole section of this passage. The beginning of this starts out with, the Jewish people, instead of, we have the Great Commission, they would have called this the Great Commandment. It begins with the great statement of faith in the Jewish world. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. But later on, and Mike focused on that first part of that passage last week, but I'd like to focus on these verses. These words that I am giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. For the Jewish people, discipling, the word is only used, I think, twice in the Old Testament. It's used a lot in the New Testament. But I think in a lot of ways, the definition or a definition of discipleship is better in the Old Testament, and I think comes from this one. That it's not something outstanding or separate that you do in your life, but it's this integrated part of our lives that in discipling in the Jewish world would have happened mostly within family. And so what he tells them is this: you have these words in your heart. As you're going about your day, repeat them to your children. Talk about them. Talk about your faith. When you're sitting in your house, when you're walking, when you're lying down, talk about what is in your heart. And Jesus turns around and says these words: for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Matthew 12:34. What comes out of our mouth is what is in our heart. And so last week's sermon focused a lot on filling what's in our heart and filling that with Jesus and God and what his teachings are for us. To me, this sermon is about letting what's in our heart come out in our everyday interactions, family, coworkers, whatever that is. And so as I wrap this up, it was hard for me to come up with one thing, because I look out in this room and I think about the people who are online, and there's a wide range of people in here. But I'm kind of breaking down into three groups. And so it kind of goes like this. The thing that I hope you take out of today and that we take out of today is this. If you're not a believer or you're a brand new believer and you're thinking, I don't know how to even fly this plane that we call the Christian life, I don't know how to do that, then discipling is for you. Last week's sermon is probably more for you. But I'm also going to share this idea with you. Mike, who was up here singing earlier, half of his job is our worship pastor. But the other half of his job is our connections pastor. And that can involve making connections. Because maybe you're sitting there thinking, I need someone to disciple me. Or maybe you're online. You've maybe never set foot in this church yet. And you're thinking, I'd like to know more about this spiritual life, this Christian life. And I need someone to disciple me, but I don't know who to ask. Well, I would suggest you contact Mike. Make yourself available and say, hey, I'm looking for this. Can you connect me with someone? And then I'm kind of jumped to another group. It's a different group. Maybe you've never been married. Maybe you're empty nesters, whatever. You might spend some time and you might have grandchildren in your home, but you are sitting here thinking, you know what? I've got some time. I've got some things I've learned in life. I'm willing to step out and do this. I'm willing to offer myself to disciple somebody, but I don't know who that person is. And so I'm going to give you the exact same piece of advice. I'm going to say, contact Mike. Make yourself available. Say, hey, I don't know who this should be, but I'm willing to step out in faith and do this. And I only warned Mike about this morning. I didn't really tell him I was going to turn him into Match.com for discipleship. But, hey, I think this is something we need to do as a church. And then the last group, there's a lot of you who your children are in your home right now. Maybe you have grandchildren who spend a lot of time in your home. And I do believe that, like God told the Jewish people, our first mission field is our home. Our first discipling is our home. And when you go back and you think about that formula, you think about time. We have a lot of time in our homes. Our kids live with us 24/7. Respect. At least when they're little, they respect us. Now, when they hit teenage years, who knows, But there is respect there. And so it's then about adding in and talking about these lessons. And this is where things like what Amber is doing in the children's ministry and sharing with parents devotionals and ideas, it's about using those things and taking advantage of the time where we have these children in our home or our grandchildren, whoever it is that we're around, that we take advantage of the time and the opportunity that God has given to share what we know and maybe what we still need to learn, but to disciple those people around us. I'd like to pray. Our Father in heaven, we just come before you and pray for your word and again for your Spirit, that all who hear this would remember and would be prompted and willing to follow through on making your commandment our commandment, that we are willing to step out in faith and share what we know with our family, with our coworkers, whomever it is. We are around people. And as we get out of this time of COVID, we will hopefully be around more people. and that we can share you and who you are with those around us. We love you, Jesus, and pray this in your name. Amen.